Accreditation for Africa and Asia, and she will introduce your presenters for today. Jackie, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks everyone for joining us today on this very important topic that really applies to every sanctuary or rescue center, no matter where you are or what species you're housing. It's also something that's in our written GFAS standards, and when we work with facilities to be accredited or verified, we want them to have disaster preparedness plans and escaped animal protocols. And it's important not only to have these plans, but also to communicate them to your staff and make sure staff knows what to do if something happens. So I'm very happy to introduce today's presenters, Gail Abranzo and Shannon Elitis, both from the International Fund for Animal Welfare, who will talk about how to do this planning. Gail is currently the Wildlife Rescue Manager for IFAW and works with rescue, rehabilitation, and release projects around the world. Shannon is IFAW's Disaster Response Manager, and in addition to responding to disasters, she works on improving disaster preparedness with IFAW and its partners, and oversees the IFAW emergency response networks. So thank you, Gail and Shannon, for sharing your knowledge and experience today. And with that, I will now turn things over to Gail.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. Today's webinar is Contingency Planning for Rehabilitation Centers and Sanctuaries. So why should we do contingency planning? Well, contingency planning prepares an organization to respond well to an emergency and its potential impact. Developing a contingency plan involves making decisions in advance about
Hi, Gail. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but it sounds like we lost your audio. I don't know if your microphone muted for some reason, but I'm hoping you can hear me. And thank you, everybody. It looks like we lost the sound for Gail, so I'm just going to try to check on that and see if we can get it taken care of. And Shannon, are you still there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Can I go ahead and continue then?
Yeah, that would be great. If you'd like, you definitely can.
Well, let's keep this party rolling here. And good morning, everyone. Oh, there's Gail.
Oh, here I am again. I'm so sorry. It keeps kicking me off for some reason, and then I have to jump through some hoops to get back on. So you probably read the slide by now. And so what I'd like to this slide is, the planning is a management tool, and it involves all sectors, which, helps to ensure timely and effective response when a disaster occurs. There are a couple common obstacles towards developing a contingency plan, and I'm sure that you can think of more. One is the lack of time. And another is that on your list of priorities and urgent matters that require attention immediately, contingency planning often falls to the bottom of your list as an issue of, we'll deal with that when it happens. But when you spend time in contingency planning, it equals time saved when a disaster occurs. So contingency planning mainly consists of answering 4 questions. When will you activate the plan, which addresses emergencies that are likely in your region or type of business you are? It doesn't only apply to national disasters. It could include a structure fire or a plumbing issues causing flooding. And then what will you do? So these are specific tasks for your staff that are all laid out in advance. And it can include animal evacuations, actions needed to maintain animals on site or animal escapes. Answer who is in charge. So there's chain of command that needs to be set, identified by position, not by name because of potential staff turnover. And then how will it get done? List the materials, the resources, the training, and this is both during the emergency and during recovery. We want you to get back to normal operations as soon as possible. So Shannon's going to be going into more depth about the considerations and the writing of your plan. So over to you, Shannon.
Thank you, Gail. So when we're talking about disaster, folks, we're talking about any emergency that has basically compromised the infrastructure and the resources available at the local level to mitigate something that has taken you out of your normal daily routine. So this can be very small scale, this can be very large scale, but we want to make sure that you're planning for all hazards and for all species. And in order to do that, we need you to start thinking about a plan. We need to start putting things down on paper. I'm sure many of you have run into the situation where people, many of you on the phone, because I see your names, you keep all this wonderful information in your head, and we need you to start putting it down on the paper. Yes, Jackson, I'm talking to you. All right, so natural disasters, and these are just some typical natural disasters that your facility may come into contact with. Of course, this is, as Gail mentioned, regionally more specific for some disasters than others, but we want you to keep these in mind because you never know what may be coming your way, and it's something to think about. Look into the history of your region. If you haven't lived in an area where your facility is your entire life, you need to be aware of what has happened in the past because it very well could be happening again. Let's learn from the past. Now, the man-made disasters that I have listed here are situations that certainly are not all-inclusive, but there are many that could potentially affect your facility. These are things that you need to take into consideration when you're thinking about the resources you're going to need to get back to regular operations when an emergency or disaster strikes. And moving forward, when we're talking about disaster contingency plan, again, I'm using disasters, but in the emergency, the word is interchangeable. So let's, it's just semantics, but you will notice that many of your planning partners will probably refer to emergencies, and so that generally accepted in our field to use emergency in place of disaster. So this is a very general planning cycle that I'd like you to keep in mind. Notice that there is no start and finish because it is continuous. This cycle keeps going, folks, and each time we loop around, we're going to keep improving our preparedness and our capabilities and competencies to mitigate the emergency. And so I'm going to mention each one of these very briefly here. I'm going to start with an exercise or response because oftentimes when you don't have a plan in place, as Gail mentioned, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, now it's happened. What are we going to do? So if that is the case and we'll say there is a response, then what we're going to do is we're going to learn from this experience. We're going to actually deal with the situation as best we can, but we're going to learn from the fact that we didn't have a plan, and when we are settling down, we're going to do a gap analysis. We're going to look at those capabilities that we have in place, and we're going to identify the capabilities that we need to do a better job next time, and in between that, well, there's your gap, and you're going to start addressing ways to shorten that gap and make sure you're better prepared next time. And the next step is develop emergency plan. Well, that's how you're going to address that gap, and you're going to start putting tasks in place to test the preparedness of your facility. And we don't want another response. We're going to exercise first, hopefully. We're going to have the time to be able to put that plan into play at a tabletop exercise and really work through the steps, the tasks, and all the way through recovery. Now, we need to go back to the working table. We need to revise our plan from the lessons learned based on the results of the exercise. And then, boom, the cycle just keeps going. And each time, we're going to improve our steps. We're going to sharpen our skills and make sure that if there are gaps identified, that we address them immediately. Now, this slide is from FEMA, and it's a great example of 6 steps that can help you when you are developing a contingency plan. This came out, this is actually found in one of your resources that we'll be providing at the end of this presentation, but this is a great model to look at. And you'll notice that it's very general, and we're going to walk through each one of these steps. Number 1, forming a collaborative planning team. This is so important because it's not only those within your facility, but it's your whole community. We're we cannot stress enough how important it is to reach out to those experts and emergency managers within your community, because a disaster is not just happening to you, it is happening to your community, because the effects can be very widespread. We believe that all disasters happen at the local level. They should be mitigated and managed at the local level, and recovery should be managed as well at that local level. Therefore, the onus is on you as a facility to be part of the solution and not part of the problem by incurring and potentially wasting more resources at that local level. So let's get prepared. Some of the core planning team members that we would recommend you look into are not, look around, local and state, or in your case, regional stakeholders. Who are the emergency managers in your area? What are they doing? What kind of plans do they have in place? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, folks. Let's look at what's already in place, what has been working, how you can fit into their plan, and how they can fit into your potential plan. Non-governmental organizations. These are organizations you may or may not be aware of in your area. Engage them. Find out what they're doing. I've listed Red Crescent. They're just a wonderful global organization that is going to be looking out for animals, or excuse me, for humans and animals alike. You need to wrap into the non-governmental organizations active in your area. Others are going to be specific to where you are and what you do, who is in your community. Again, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's look to other rehab centers and sanctuaries. Let's also look for local experts in your area that you can build into your team. So this collaborative planning team needs to be very well thought out, and these are your key stakeholders. So be careful about who you engage at this point. The second step is understanding the situation. Every one of you is going to have a different situation to address if and when a disaster strikes. Risk assessment can be broken down very easily into this simple formula. Hazard, the hazards you are experiencing or could potentially experience, times your vulnerability. How prepared are you as a facility and as experts? And you need to take away your capacity. So if your risk for a hazard, if you are in, for example, right at the base of a volcano, your hazard is going to be a volcano. What is your vulnerability? Well, your vulnerability is very high, and if you do not have a plan in place and you do not have the capacity to deal with an eruption, then now your capacity is very low. So you have very high risk to be affected, as well as your staff, the animals, and your community. So the procedure for looking at your risk and assessing that is to again form an assessment team. Now this is going to be different than your planning team that we discussed at the beginning, because the assessment team is going to know. There are going to be more of those boots on the ground folks that are going to be able to look specifically at those hazards. They're going to be able to focus on the vulnerability of your facility in a specific situation. And this team is going to have to be very honest, very transparent, and be able to report back to that planning team about what kind of gap you're looking at. This is the risk we're looking at. This is what we have in place to deal with it. And then, boom, this is what we're going to need. Please focus very much on that second step of assessing your risk, because without that, you're not going to be able to move to the third step, which is determining your goals and objectives. Again, this is going to be site-specific, and you're going to have to develop your goals and objectives with primarily your staff and the animals in mind. But again, we must emphasize that human safety is always your top priority. I will give an example. A sanctuary had a fire not too long ago, wildfire approaching the sanctuary. 2 employees decided to stay inside because they knew from them, they said they knew that the fire department would not risk loss of life, and they would prevent the fire from reaching the sanctuary. They had no evacuation plan, and they stayed in, and it was very dangerous, and it was actually unacceptable. And so now they do have an emergency plan for evacuating their animals so that those human staff members are not put in danger again. That is not an acceptable plan. It's not fair to the fire service that was trying to protect them, and it's also not fair to the animals. And but let's not forget, humans are our top priority. So your goals may be based on your specific situation, either evacuating or being able to provide care in place. And the objectives that you're going to have to the objectives you're going to set will be based on those goals that you decide as a facility, and they are going to either require an evacuation plan or a plan for sheltering in place. You're going to need to also determine who is in charge before, during, and after the emergency. So this is what we call incident command system, developing a method of identifying who is in charge, keeping one voice active at all times, and identifying that command structure where people are identified specific roles, they have responsibilities, and they understand how they fit into the system without question. You'll need to develop a list of tasks, and those tasks will be set up so that your objectives will be very clear who does them and how they do them. Materials and equipment need to also be identified, and you need to develop a scenario for each goal, because you need to make sure that you can test and evaluate how you have addressed a particular goal, and is that sufficient to protect the animals and people in your care. The plan development is a lot of sitting down and getting to work, actually writing down an executive summary, emergency management elements, and your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, and the support documents that will support them, obviously. So you need to think as a facility what these components look like. Your sections need to be very clear, they need to be very succinct, and they need to be manageable. Let me go back real quick here. So if anyone has any questions about these particular sections, please don't hesitate to ask, because this is where things get a little foggy for folks. Here we'll talk a little bit more about your preparedness for writing your plan, reviewing and approving your plan. Once you get the plan actually written down, you need to review it, and you need to get it to those folks. You see a lot of people around the table in that picture. You need to make sure that all of your key stakeholders are aware of the decisions that you have made about how best to protect the animals and staff at your facility, and you need to make sure that there's approval. You need to make sure this conversation is safe, in a safe environment, that people can be transparent and honest, because this is the most important part of your plan, is making sure that you can actually implement the plan and make any changes that need to be made in a timely manner, because you need to get something set. So implementation and maintenance, we're very, very adamant about making sure that the gaps that you've identified that you fill those gaps, whether it be with resources or training, making sure that your facility staff and volunteers have the skills, knowledge, and ability to be able to implement this plan. Because it does no good to have a plan on paper and have key stakeholders approve it if the people on the ground, your caretakers and your management at the facility, don't know how to do it or don't have the knowledge to be able to implement that plan. You can test that by exercising your plan. I've mentioned tabletop exercises, scenario training events, putting on something that, guaranteeing, okay, every 6 months we are going to have another scenario and our staff's not going to know about it. We're going to go ahead as a key stakeholder. We are going to throw them an incident and an emergency and see how they do. Review, revise, and maintain the plan. Setting timelines is very important, whether it's 6 months, yearly. Have those exercises. Give yourself 1 month, for example, 1 month to revise the plan. Give yourself 1 more month to implement new plans, and then test them again 6 months after that. Set up a timeline so that you constantly know you constantly know the ready state of your plan, and everyone, whether there's turnover in staff or volunteers, that this is a regular part of everyone's ongoing professional development. Here again is that slide with the 6 steps from FEMA, and again, we're going to get all this information to you. But we need to stress that everyone is going to be a little bit different, but there's no reason that we can't share and compare plans that are already in place to try to acclimate those to our needs. But again, it's going to have to be your facility staff, your key stakeholders, and your community that come together to decide what is possible for your facility, what is financially possible, what is possible resource-wise, and then make sure that you are part of the whole solution.
And so now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about crisis communications. So crisis communications means the response that your organization will have to a situation that threatens to significantly damage your reputation or have a very negative impact if dealt with incorrectly. And I'm talking about your outside audience, your board of directors, anything aside, pretty much aside of the communications that you have with your staff. So every organization is vulnerable to crisis, and the key is to prepare for them as much as you can. So a crisis could be like a natural disaster, a disastrous event at your facility, or even a scandal within your organization. So I'm going to give you 10 tips on how to deal with some crisis communications. Before you're faced with a crisis where you'll need to communicate what's currently happening and what actions you're taking, you should plan ahead as best you can with a communications plan. You may realize that some of the communication crisis situations are preventable simply by modifying talking points that you've prepared ahead of time. Talking points can be as general as something like, "We are closely tracking the storm," and "We have implemented our emergency protocols." Something very general that you can give to either your board or the media or the public to say that you're on top of things, but you aren't going into detail. A small team of senior leaders or managers should be identified to serve as your organization's crisis communications team. And your organization should ensure that only authorized spokespersons speak for it. And this is particularly important during a crisis. All stakeholders, both internal and external, are just as capable of misunderstanding or misinterpreting information about your organization as the media, and it's your responsibility to minimize the chances of that happening. And then spokesperson training teaches you to be prepared to respond in a way that optimizes the messages you're putting out. Today we have the means to reach out to our internal and external audiences using multiple modalities. Social media may be the best and fastest way to reach some of your stakeholders, but setting up social media accounts must be done beforehand, not after a crisis breaks. Also, intelligence gathering is an essential component of both crisis prevention and response. Knowing what's being said about you on social media allows you to catch a negative trend that, if unchecked, turns into a crisis and will allow you to accurately adapt your strategies and tactics in communication. So who are the stakeholders that matter to your organization? Employees can be your most important audience because every employee is a PR representative and crisis manager for your organization, whether you want them to or not. So it's up to you to ensure that they receive the messages that you would like them to repeat elsewhere. While full message development must wait for the actual outbreak of the crisis, holding statements or talking points that I mentioned earlier can be designed for use immediately after a crisis breaks and can be developed in advance to be used for a wide variety of scenarios which the organization is perceived to be vulnerable based on the assessment that you conducted. Reacting without adequate information can result in a situation in which you could be the primary victim. However, if you've done all of the above first, it's a simple matter of having the crisis communication team on the receiving end of information coming in from your team members, ensuring the right type of information is being provided so you can proceed with determining the appropriate response. Assessing the crisis situation is the first crisis communication step you can't take in advance. But if you haven't prepared in advance, your reaction will be delayed by the time your staff runs through steps 1 through 7. When you have holding statements available as your starting point, your crisis communications team must continue developing the crisis-specific messages required for any given situation. And I would advise to keep it simple. Have no more than 3 main messages that go to all stakeholders, and as necessary, some audience-specific messages for individual groups of stakeholders like your board of directors or your trustees. After the crisis is over and things are returning to normal, the questions must be asked, what did we learn from this? An analysis of what was done right, what was done wrong, and what could be done better next time in communications, and how to improve the various elements of crisis communication preparedness is another must-do activity for any crisis communications team. So listed here are some resources that you can look at to help you with your planning. I think these are somewhat U.S.-centric, with the exception of the Zoo Animal Health Network, which is a basic guide for wildlife facilities. And this answers some of the questions you might have as you go along with your planning. So that concludes our webinar, and we'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Shannon and Gail. I will mention again to the attendees, please feel free to type in any questions you have into the chat box, and we'll pass those along right now to the presenters. We'll go ahead and get started with Jackie. I believe she's got a question to pass along.
I do. Actually, I was thinking of a couple of questions while I was listening to both of you and thinking about the discussions that we often have with sanctuaries and rescue centers we're working with. And so I wanted to first ask if you have some advice or best practices for what an organization is considering in a disaster response plan, whether to evacuate or shelter in place. Often because of the location and the number of animals in the facility, it's really not possible to evacuate or to evacuate all animals. But are there any tips you can give for when this planning is going into place or when the training is being done on how to choose evacuating versus shelter in place, and some specific things to consider for a shelter in place plan for safety of animals and staff?
Okay, well, I can take that question and some of it, and then Shannon can chime in if she has any additional advice. A lot of it depends on the species that you care for and the incident. For example, if you have a fast-moving fire and you have large carnivores, you're not going to be able to evacuate quickly with these animals. So once again, in your planning phase, you need to address mitigation factors. For example, in advance, knowing that you have identified that wildfires are a threat to your facility, then you clear the shrubs away from the facility. You dig fire trenches, and other factors to prepare for in the event of a fast approaching wildfire. Shannon, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I was just going to mention that so much depends on the resources available to you. Do you have a transport trailer? Do you have the means by which you'd be able to transport animals out of the facility? So evacuation, Jackie, it boils down to what kind of resources do I have available, and do I have a receiving facility on the other end that I'm going to be able to evacuate these animals to? Because you can't just take them to the local dog park, can you? You're going to need to make sure that you're working with other rehab facilities, sanctuaries, to where a partnership or a mutual aid agreement is reached before a disaster, and you're able to identify how you can help one another. Because as that fire is approaching, Gail's right, you may not be able to evacuate everyone, but do you have a plan in place to evacuate some of your animals? And she brought up really good points about how to mitigate for wildfires, but there are great examples out there for every type of hazard and how that could potentially affect your facility and how to mitigate that. So we can share those individually with folks, and don't forget that you've got good resources in your partners and folks like Gail's team here and my team. We want to make sure that if you need an extra pair of eyes or someone to come in and just help facilitate an exercise or training or look at your plan and help kind of walk through with an outside perspective, please know that we would love to be able to support you in that way.
And that's great, and I'm sure we will take you up on that. And that leads to a second question I wanted to ask about training. As I mentioned at the beginning, in our standards, we certainly address both having a plan and having regular trainings to make sure your staff knows about it and that you can get feedback on the plan. But I wanted to see from your experiences if you can give some tips or best practices on how to have an effective training to make sure your staff understands what to do and how you can most effectively get that feedback to evaluate whether you need to change your plan.
Well, I'll jump in first on this one, Gail, and just let everyone know that training is going to be site-specific. It's going to be based on your needs and your resources. What we would recommend is that you don't train on something that you can't follow through with when a disaster strikes. So training on swift water rescue when you're going to be dealing primarily with fires may not be the best use of your training resources. So let's be smart and practical about the training content that you want to present to your staff and volunteers. It needs to not only be practical and feasible, but it needs to be up to date, and it needs to be inclusive of the whole community. So being able to involve not only the staff and volunteers, but making sure that you engage the community members that would or could be involved in some type of evacuation or sheltering in place. This is the time to engage those emergency managers, the Ministry of Agriculture, whomever you may be working with in your region who has been given that delegation of authority to manage animals in disasters. You need to engage them even at the training stage. They need to be involved because their feedback is just as important as the feedback of your staff and volunteers. When it comes to trying to decide what that training should, please know that there are examples of tabletop exercises and practical exercises that we can get to you. But again, they're site specific, so let's not reinvent the wheel, but at the same time recognize there's a whole bunch out there.
And additionally, Shannon brings up a good point about engaging, the wildlife authorities. When you're doing your planning, it's really important to involve the wildlife authorities within your planning. When you engage the authorities in your planning, now you've taken a great step towards buy-in. And so when the chips are down and you need help, they can be a fantastic resource for you in terms of dealing with any governmental red tape, or even furnishing some labor or some equipment, or helping you with evacuation, or identifying a safe site for you. So, regardless of your relationship now that you have with the wildlife authorities, whether it's confrontational or a good relationship, I think, it's always a good idea to strengthen that relationship by including them in your planning.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Robin because I know there's a question in the queue.
Perfect. Thanks, Jackie. And again, everybody, please feel free to type a question in the chat if you have it. But we had a question asking, is there a crisis communication template or model to share? And also, is there an emergency planning or emergency planning for contingency planning template to share?
Yes, we certainly have templates and models, but again, that's going to be specific to a region and to a facility, and as Gail mentioned, the type of species that you're managing and the resources available to you. So the template these are going to be very basic things, but we'd rather work one-on-one with folks to be able to make sure that they have something as similar to what they're looking at locally as possible.
Great, thank you very much. Excuse me. It doesn't look like I have any other questions right now, but I'll go ahead and leave it open for another minute in case anybody wants to type in any questions into the chat box. But again, I will mention while I'm giving you a chance to do that we did record this session, so you will get a link for that in the next day or so you can go back and review information, or feel free to pass the link along to other people that you think would benefit from this information. And I would like to say a huge thank you to Shannon and Gail for this great presentation. We appreciate your time in doing this. And I want to see if Jackie has any closing comments, and then if Gail and Shannon also have any closing comments.
I just wanted to thank Gail and Shannon again. It's such an important topic, and as Gail and Shannon point out, it really is something that has to be specific to your facility, but there are certainly some common factors that everyone needs to think about when they're evaluating what kind of plan they need. We'll work on getting some templates or sample documents together that we can share, and if anyone wants to send one in that they'd like to share or for consideration, please consider sending it to us and we can pool them so everyone has them.
I would like to
And
thank
then
Robin and Jackie GFAS because this is a topic very near and dear to us, and they're just there's no reason for anyone to face these types of challenges alone, and I commend you for bringing this topic to everyone's attention, and I encourage everyone to get started and know that you have resources available to you. We have a wonderful relationship with GFAS, and we're here to help you and just make sure that we're protecting your staff and the animals in your care. So thank you, GFAS.
And while we were talking, we had one more question come in that I wanted to pass along. What kind of technical training resources are available to facilities in Africa and Asia?
Well, I'll take that, Gail, because we do have on the disaster response team, we have a very strong technical training program and technical response, technical rescue instructors. However, again, those types of opportunities are site specific and they would need to be designed for you. So we can talk more about where you're looking specifically in Africa and Asia and what may be available, both through IFAW or our partners, both international and national to those countries.
Great, thank you so much.
I just wanted to interject a little bit more about the crisis communications aspect. I think everybody has been put in a position where they've been accosted by the media, if you will, about making statements as to the situation. And I can't stress enough how helpful it is and how reassuring it is to have talking points in advance and to have one or two people speak for the organization. We all are very much aware of how the media could either help or harm us. And so we need to be very careful and cognizant of the damage that we can do when we aren't prepared for the questions that are going to be asked, or to have false information or inaccurate information sent out to the public by staff who aren't informed, who don't know how to speak to the press. And so to have these scenarios and potential talking points in advance is very reassuring, and to practice speaking to the media, even in a quasi training, to say, we're going to review these talking points. Here's the crisis communication team. Someone is going to video you, and someone's going to play the media. And so those can be quite fun to do, but they can also bring to light how potentially you might be inadequately prepared for when the media starts asking these questions. And it's also very helpful in planning in advance how you will ask for help, because all of us who have been in any kind of response know that through the goodness of people's hearts, they will also help in a way that's not very helpful. And for example, you're in the midst of a crisis, and people will bring piles of food or blankets or supplies, and now you've got to take staff away from handling the emergency to do supplies and inventory or deal with the public. And so to have in advance talking points about ways that people can help will be helpful to both the facility and to the public who may have a sympathy for what you're going through and want to help. So, some of the things that you may suggest to the public is a prepaid credit card or monetary donations, or report animals to this number, or if you've those kind of things can be prepared for in advance and will help you to leave a good impression on the public when it's all over.
Thank you. It looks like we don't have any other questions right now. So again, I want to say a huge thank you to our presenters, and I want to thank you all for attending today. We appreciate your taking the time to be here, and please definitely feel free to take advantage of the recording. And again, thank you to Gail and Shannon and Jackie for all your help with this.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Jackie, for allowing us to speak on a topic we're pretty fervent about.
Thank you.
Well, I hope everybody has a great day, and if you have any questions, you can always feel free to follow up with us by email. So thanks again, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.